Here. This is probably top of mind for most of us. We've got, my husband and I were talking today. We're just real sick of getting texts all day, every day from people talking about politics that we don't know. And, pretty soon our kids are going to be in that melee and they're probably already swept up in some of it. So, we know it's going on and there's, not just politics, but also lots of current events going on right now. Middle East, Ukraine and Russia, right? All the stuff around the world, like even Asheville and
Even the hurricanes, right?
Helene. And so I think, it's top of mind to think about how do we address these issues with our kids in a way that's age appropriate and helpful and also, respectful and teaches them kind of, I don't know, to look at things in a good way. So our key takeaways, I was thinking about this, that, our own emotional awareness really influences our children's. And that's obviously not just for politics and current events, that's for everything. But somebody was telling me, right, or Becky, you just said parenting is hard. And somebody was telling me parenting is actually hard because it really reveals just how much you have to grow as a person. And I feel like this is an area where we all are, needing growth. um, and then we're going to talk a little bit about being age appropriate in the content we share and what does age appropriate look like for different ages. And then thinking about this idea of curiosity being your best tool and how it can really vanquish judgment. I think that quote comes from either Tim Scott or Kim Scott, or I think it's from Radical Candor from Kim Scott. I'm not sure. So let's get going. Becky, I want to ask, you know, uh, when you think about like emotions, politics in particular, but all current events, right? These bring up different emotions in us, and that's why they're so hard to talk about. In one of his books called The Happiness Hypothesis, Jonathan Haidt talks about this metaphor of the elephant and the rider, and that our emotions are the elephant, and then our logic brain is the rider, and that very often the elephant can kind of take control of us. And we are this help us rider on top of these raging elephant emotions. And so I'm sort of curious in your time as an educator, what emotions did you see come up for kids around current events or politics?
Well, in my experience, what I saw in the elementary school was children who were coming to school having heard things for which they had no context.
Mm.
And that was because parents had the news on, either in the home or on the radio in the car, or they openly had adult discussions in front of their children, which the children seemed to have been playing or whatever, but were listening to the whole thing and they get it wrong. And so the children come to school with misinformation because they did not understand, they had no context, and then they share it with their friends. And so the elementary school becomes really a churning, a turbid place of misinformation where children need context and they need to learn what is right in that age appropriate way.
I think that's really interesting because, information is power. And so, then I remember teaching in middle school, there was a lot of like that um, identity building around some of this, right? So it's like, oh, if you disagree with me, it's not just you disagree with this idea, but you're disagreeing with me as a person, which could lead to feelings of betrayal or anger, or there's a lot of self righteousness going on. And so I think for me as an adult, I think the first step to dealing with all of this is to think about what emotions are coming up for me and to be able to identify those so that they don't become the elephant that I'm riding. And I don't want my emotions to guide what content I let my kids see or what I say to them, what they overhear between me and my husband at home talking, or, between me and anybody on the phone, or even listening to the radio and my reactions. So, we have this thing called an emotion wheel in our house. I wish I had put a chart on this, but do you guys use those? Becky, did y'all use those at school at all? The emotion wheels?
Absolutely. We emotional literacy, if you remember a couple years ago when we were doing food for thought, emotional literacy is the first building block to for a child. And hopefully, I usually all the people who are coming to our podcasts are we're preaching to the choir. So you're already working on emotional literacy for your children. And in every situation, the favorite thing I say is be the adult. And so, mastering our own emotions and identifying them in front of our children can be helpful. They know we have emotions. And so, if we're open to talking about them, you can even say, I feel a little upset right now, so I'm going to take a break and we can talk about this in a little bit so that they learn the tools. Um, Boomy says she has a few wheels. I love that. Thank you, Boomy. Um, yes, the teachers, we always hand it out. Boomy says it's good to share them with the teachers. The teachers hopefully are all working on emotional literacy and um, they have a great way to do that because in creative writing, when the students are creating characters, the characters are more real if they experience emotions. And so the teachers normally are providing lists of vocabulary so that in education, we always say children say mad, sad, glad. They don't really say glad anymore, but it rhymes, right? They're mad, they're sad, or they're happy. Expanding that by showing them that you have more complex emotions and using the wheel.
I think too, for kids who don't really have more than mad, sad, or glad, one thing that can be helpful, and this also can be helpful for me, if I'm in a political discussion or, I'm hearing something, and especially if my kids are around, for me to identify what's happening in my body, to say, okay, well, is my neck tight? Are my shoulders feeling heavy? Is my jaw clenched? Is there tension behind like the back of my head? Right. Those things indicate frustration or whatever. And if I can be in tune with those things and then even help my kids to be in tune, right? When you hear people talking about, like if your kid comes up and says, I feel really sad or scared about what happened in Nashville, a lot of times you can say, well, where are you feeling that in your body? And sometimes that helps make them that like concrete and they can relax it. Or you can also say, like, wow, it sounds like you feel empathy for the people who were hurt, in that or whatever. And being able to give them those names to the emotion helps them not get carried away by that, particularly as they age. Um,
I think it's really important. I have already had this problem dealing with my 1-year-old this week is phone free time. Put your phone away when you are interacting with your children. It is so hard. It's actually so easy because we're addicted to our own phones. And especially at this time when the news is so complex, just wait until you are not in the presence of your child. Put the phone away because they see and they're just going to model after us. And your phone is a trigger often. You get a bad email from work comes in, a bad text from somebody, or bad news, some news report. Somebody just said this outrageous thing. So put the phone away.
I think the last thing is, especially with those emotions that are sort of like that charging elephant, like anger, or frustration, or even sadness, giving kids this little kind of magic phrase. It comes from positive discipline, but this idea of like, I feel blank, right? Like I feel angry because I heard Becky say that whoever votes for X is a dum dum. And I wish that she didn't say that, right? But that sort of I feel X because and I wish can really help kids take those emotions and transfer those things into kind of positive action steps, or even just like to be able to communicate things in a way that you can hear, right? And the I wish is such a crucial piece because a lot of times for me, I assume why my kids are upset. I'm like, oh my gosh, did you hear about, this thing that happened, you know, in Israel? And oh my gosh, or did you hear this thing that happened in Palestine? Or did you hear this thing that happened in, wherever? Or did you hear what this politician said? And um, I'm assuming that they have a lot of context, and sometimes they don't, right? It's just like, and I wish that I could, have a sandwich. It's like, oh, okay, well, we could sort that out, right? Anything else on that, Becky?
No, I'm interested in these next three slides.
Okay, great. So these I got from Lisa Demore, who is a great just resource. She's got a lot of stuff online that's really helpful. And so she talks about how when your kids are kind of 0 to 5, they're in that like a very young age. If you have some of those, really, it's not great to talk about current events politics. Just focus on teaching and talking about values with your kids. So it's always a like, okay, acknowledge, redirect. Okay, let's talk about kindness. Let's talk about sharing. Let's talk about fairness. Let's relate things to the world, right? We share toys. Everyone should be treated fairly, right? Because we share because we want to be fair or whatever. And then also just, and again, this is that like protecting our kids' innocence. Let's not let them be party to our discussions or our news watching or our radio listening of violence or complex topics. It's just not appropriate for them, and they're not cognitively ready to access it. And it can be really
Absolutely.
scary for kids.
Absolutely. There's so much data that says that children take on the worldview of the parents by age 5. So, to the extent that you are sharing your values, you're expressing them, you're demonstrating, they're seeing the way you treat everyone. Um, Everyone is in my family. I taught every human is created in the image of God. So every human they encounter, do they see you modeling that? And I think that's really difficult in a time of elections when we have heated feelings about different candidates. Nonetheless, they're all created by God. And that's how I taught my children. And I know they heard that by the time they were 5 and took that on. So it's a great time to be intentional and to shield them, like Peyton said, from they don't need to know anything about contemporary events.
So now, as we're getting into kind of that elementary age, 6 to 10, it's a great time. I always think of this age as like the teaching years where you're doing a lot of teaching about how the world works. So it's a great time to explain processes like, hey, we're having elections coming up, and here's how this works. This is how we make decisions as a country. Or hey, if something comes up about war, right? War is a fight between two countries who've disagreed and possibly for a long time. And you don't need to go into the details. Just give that 30,000 foot view, like, what is this? And then wait for them to ask questions and only answer the question they ask. Right? A lot of times we feel like, oh, I need to give a dissertation on why this candidate is important, but maybe they might just say, why are you going to vote for this candidate? You don't need to go into this. Or maybe they might say, why does nobody like this candidate? Right? You can just say everybody disagrees. You don't have to go into, point by point rundown for them. And again, just this relating to real life experiences for them, right? It's like, just like you don't like it when somebody, wrecks your Lego house, the people in Asheville are probably feeling pretty devastated right now because their house got wrecked, and on like a pretty big scale. And that kind of fairness and justice, right? That can help them really start to grab hold of these more abstract ideas.
I I posted in the chat a link to a fabulous, very short document by Kids Health that relates to the elections, but it also relates to all current events. And I think the most important thing, which they put first, is find out what your child already knows. This is something I was not good at. When I was raising my kids, I was a preacher. And so I talked way too much. You can turn that around, make up for all my past mistakes by when you're in the car, say something like, have the kids at school been talking about the hurricane? Or um, are things going on at school about the election? And then let them talk, find out what they know, listen carefully because you will hear if there are concerns. They'll say something that alerts you that either they heard misinformation, which happens all day long, but find out what they know first, um, and then tell them the truth, like Peyton said, but only age appropriate truth, only what they need to know. Just like when we taught you guys about the birds and the bees, you only tell them what they need to know basis.
Yeah. And I think too, there's another question that is one of my favorites, Becky, especially when my kids will hit me with something and I'm like, I'm not quite sure how to answer this because it feels like it's going to be a big one. I'll ask them, can you tell me a little bit more about why you're asking that question? And a lot of times it's a lot more simple than what I thought it was going to be. So that keep that question in your pocket too, you guys. So then thinking about, age appropriate content now that if you got some middle schoolers, so 11 to 14, right? Fifth grade and up. This is when they are going to start to really kind of be exposed to some stuff. And this is when you're maybe monitoring their stress level about it. That question that Becky asked, like, what have you been hearing about this? Or have you been hearing anything? Is a good one for this age in particular. I think also she talks about discussing different perspectives. And this is hard. This is going back to that emotional intelligence piece, because if we hold, particularly around politics, we all hold strong beliefs and have reasons why we vote the way we do. And so do other people. And I think this is what will challenge our emotional intelligence is, am I able to, with my children, share what both sides think in this moment in a respectful way that reveals open-mindedness and curiosity, and also shares with my kids why I think the way I do, and then ask them questions about what might they think, right?
Yeah.
um,
And model the behavior that you want to see from your child. It's so difficult. We always want our children to be better people than we are. We know our own faults and we have aspirations for our children. And model your best self when you're talking about other candidates who are despicable in your own mind or whatever, so that they grow up in that wonderful innocence that we want all young people to have. Is that number one, we have a two-party system, we have different perspectives, and we come together as a nation to make a selection, the best selection. It's hard in this age, what Jonathan Haidt actually calls post-Babel. He has an article out there about where he sees things were a little more straightforward with politics before 2011. And if you look for that article online, Jonathan Haidt post Babel, he talks about how that's the year 2011 is the year that Google Translate came out. And if you know the story of Babel, it was when people wanted to be able to communicate, but it broke things down and made them worse. And he traces it all to 2011. Interesting article, but just model your best self, be informed, but keep those difficult conversations between adults.
Mm. And then as your kids are getting older and high school, this is when you can really dive in with them on causes and effects of political decisions and events, asking them to kind of share their opinions, help them understand credibility and bias and why you choose to listen to what you choose to listen to, and ask them, tell me about your sources. Where are you hearing this information? Tell me about how you figure out whether it's trustworthy or not. And then also, help them see that like there's long-term impact, and obviously like how important voting is, right? And how important elections are and peaceful transfer of power and all the things that we, hold dear as Americans. Just the idea that we can vote at all, right? And there are things that are common as well. And I think that finding that commonality and in a respectful way, helping kids be open-minded is really helpful.
Yeah, at this age, you can give them a sense of agency. I
Mhm.
love the idea of, going and collecting supplies for the victims of the hurricane disasters, or even in the older age groups, they can work at polling, and there are all sorts of things they can do. They can have, if they feel like it, they can advocate for certain positions by the time they're in high school. They're really at Westminster. They're well informed. They're very articulate, and they're able to do that type of thing. I think one note of caution that we must all be aware of is that with AI and the possibility of deep fake, and we've already experienced fake news, we've experienced lying as a strategy in politics. All of these things, I guess, are really what Jonathan Haidt's talking about. But our children are going to be growing up in an age where critical thinking is so important. The ability to question sources, to question statements, to fact check, all of those things are a bigger part, will be a bigger part of their lives than they were in our lives.
In fact, we may be the ones having to ask them to teach us how to do that.
I mean, it's crazy. It's there. We really do. We need to do a program on that and look into it.
Yeah,
Um, I
it's
have a very close person at OpenAI. Everything's changing very quickly.
well, and I think, then that leads us to kind of the last point. And this is, I think, actually the thing that is like the linchpin that holds this all together, is that if we can default as parents into curiosity instead of judgment. So particularly like when our kids are young, like tell me about what you're hearing. Tell me about why you think that. Tell me how you feel when you hear that. What's on your mind? All that. That's kind of step one. But then also teaching our kids that, okay, well, maybe I'm in class and I hear someone say something that I feel either scared or mad or disappointed, or I have some sort of emotion around it, around a current event or a political thing during the election time. How do I tolerate that discomfort, and get curious about, in my response to the other person, ooh, wow, that brought something up in me. Can I be curious about why you said that? Tell me more, right? To teach our kids that frame of tell me more, or can you share a little bit more about your perspective? Because that's what's going to lead to civil discourse, which is what I believe. I'm assuming maybe, but I believe that we all want that. We all want our kids to thrive and be able to discuss civilly ideas. And the way that you do that is when you feel uncomfortable or you disagree with what someone says in a vehement way, that you can still not let that elephant take over. But the way that you can do that, again, curiosity vanquishes judgment, is you get curious and you say, hey, well, I don't need to prove to this person what I think. I want to learn why they think what they think, or I need to learn more because I'm having this reaction. Maybe I wonder why.
And don't forget, you might end up with a child like my firstborn who just likes to throw zingers out into the world. Um, right? They hear something at school and they come home and they throw it out there as if it was truth and as if they own it, but they just heard it on the playground. So they come home, they throw something outrageous into the dinner hour, and that's where I was always triggered and my emotion took over as a parent and I started preaching. So I was full disclosure. That's where you follow Peyton's plan and you use you become aware of your emotions and you become the adult in the room and you say, tell me more about that, rather than what I did. But you might have a child like that, and that's somebody who absorbs a lot and just wants to try it out on mom or dad.
Well, and honestly, one thing in positive discipline, kind of an underpinning of that philosophy, is that all people want is belonging and significance. And if we can remember that that's what our kids want when they are feeling anxious or scared or angry or whatever about politics, and honestly, that's what we want too, right? Um, Asking the question, okay, do I feel this way because it's triggering my sense of belonging or because it's triggering my sense of significance or mattering? Um, and a lot of times, those are the two things that make us kind of go off a little bit. And if we can think about how, okay, in politics or current events, like Becky said, my kids can help. Man, that offers belonging and significance in a way that is really fruitful. Um, so collecting supplies for, victims of a natural disaster, or going out and even like ringing doorbells for your favorite candidate. Like, I think you can do that with lots of ages, maybe not with all ages of kids, but, you know, you can involve your kids in your passions in a way that is helpful.
We know it's hard work. We hope that today was helpful. Peyton will always remind you that, oh, and remember there, I did put that link in the chat. I really do like that short little document. We are not psychologists, therapists, or counselors. We are not doctors. We are educators, and we hope that our passion for children and especially schools is apparent, and that you'll join us next week and invite your friends.
Absolutely. And we're actually going to do my three favorite strategies of positive discipline next week. So looking
All
forward to it.
right.
Thanks,
Sounds
Sean.
great.
See you next